The true story of Cinderella does not begin with a shining castle or a fairy godmother but with a grave. Cinderella's mother, a kind and loving woman, fell gravely ill and knew she would not live to see her daughter grow up. In her final moments, she called the young girl and gave her a request laden with pain and hope. "My dear, always remain good and pure of heart. If you do, I will always look after you even after my death." These words were etched into Cinderella's soul, and with a shattered heart she watched her mother pass away. Shortly after the funeral, Cinderella's father wasted no time bringing a new wife into the house, a woman with 2 daughters as beautiful as they were cruel. The stepmother and stepsisters immediately set out to turn the girl's life into a nightmare. They took away her comfortable room, forcing her to sleep in a filthy, cold corner of the kitchen, among the ashes of the stove. This earned her the cruel nickname, Cinderella, a mockery of her miserable state. However, Cinderella found refuge. Whenever the chores became unbearable or the humiliation too heavy, she ran to her mother's grave, where a beautiful hazel tree had grown. With tears in her eyes, she knelt and prayed, asking for strength to endure her new life. And something curious happened. White birds descended from the sky, perched on the branches of the tree and sang softly as if trying to soothe her heart. These birds soon became Cinderella's only friends. They watched over her from above, seemingly understanding her pain. When she sought their help, they listened. It was as though they were the eyes of her deceased mother, fulfilling the promise made on her deathbed. Yet Cinderella's life was about to take an even darker turn. Over time, the stepmother revealed the full extent of her cruelty. She not only mocked Cinderella but turned her life into an endless series of humiliations and impossible tasks. Every day, the young girl was forced to rise before dawn, scrub the stone kitchen floor, polish pans until they gleamed in the sunlight, and carry water for baths and dinners. Meanwhile, her stepsisters, dressed in silk and adorned with jewels, simply watched and laughed at Cinderella's bruised and dirty hands. The stepmother seemed to derive sadistic pleasure from devising especially cruel tasks for her stepdaughter. On one occasion, she intentionally threw a sack of lentils into the fireplace ashes and ordered, "If you don't pick out every grain one by one from the ashes by nightfall, you won't eat today." With trembling hands and a heavy heart, Cinderella knelt to begin. But as silent tears streamed down her cheeks, the white birds came to her aid once again. They descended from the hazel tree's branches, flew through the window, and began to separate the lentils with swift beaks and claws. When they finished, they sang a brief melody and disappeared like ghosts. Even so, the stepmother never seemed satisfied. She increased the weight of Cinderella's chores and made it clear that in this house she was not a daughter, she was a servant. But the young girl endured everything. When despair overwhelmed her, she ran to her mother's grave and prayed for strength, while the birds watched silently as if waiting for the right moment to truly intervene. It was during this period of suffering that news reached the village. The king had decided to host a grand ball, an event where his son, the prince, would choose a bride. Cinderella's stepsisters immediately began making plans, believing the ball was the perfect opportunity to secure the throne. And that's when the stepmother revealed an even more wicked plan to Cinderella. As the sisters and stepmother prepared for the grand ball, the house turned into utter chaos. Luxurious fabrics, sparkling jewels, and expensive perfumes were strewn about everywhere. Cinderella, as always, was called to assist, tasked with adjusting dresses, polishing shoes, and arranging elaborate hairstyles. Yet deep in her heart she longed to go to the ball. When she dared to express this desire, the stepmother burst into cruel laughter. "You go to the ball? In what clothes? Who would want to look at you, covered in ashes and dirt?" Still Cinderella insisted. And to get rid of her, the stepmother presented another impossible challenge. "If you can collect 2 entire sacks of lentils that I will throw into the fireplace ashes, you may go to the ball." As soon as the grains hit the ground, Cinderella knelt in despair, knowing she could not complete the task alone. Once more she called on her bird friends. "Birds of the sky, come help me, the good ones to the pot and the bad ones to the crop." In an instant, a flock flew in through the window, and the birds, with swift beaks and claws, separated the lentils from the ashes, filling the sacks in the blink of an eye. Thrilled, Cinderella presented the completed task to her stepmother. But the promise was not kept. With a cold smile, the woman simply declared, "Even so, you will not go. There is no place for a filthy servant at the ball." Heartbroken, Cinderella ran to her mother's grave and, in tears, told everything that had happened. The birds descended again, but this time they brought something special. At that moment, the enchanted hazel tree, watered by the girl's tears, offered her a magical gift, a golden dress that shone like the sun and brilliant golden shoes. Now Cinderella was ready for the ball. But there was a mysterious condition. The birds seemed to whisper that she must return before midnight, as if the enchantment was bound to time. Thus, as her makeshift carriage carried her to the castle, a new hope was born in her heart. But what she didn't know was that this ball would only be the beginning of a dangerous game. When Cinderella arrived at the castle, all eyes turned to her. Dressed in the dazzling golden gown and shoes that glittered like stars, she seemed as though she didn't belong to this world. Even her stepsisters who were present in the hall didn't recognize her. Could she be a princess from distant lands? They whispered among themselves as Cinderella gracefully crossed the ballroom with an almost otherworldly elegance. The prince, mesmerized, walked straight to her without hesitation. He invited her to dance, and as they twirled around the hall, he couldn't take his eyes off her. Cinderella, however, remained cautious, avoiding questions that might reveal who she truly was. The ball continued, but something unsettled the young woman. The birds who had stayed outside the castle perched on the windows and chirped softly as if giving a warning. The clock was nearing midnight, and Cinderella knew she had to leave. As the clock began to chime 12 strokes, she let go of the prince's hand and fled, descending the palace stairs in a rush as if escaping a terrible fate. It was then that something unexpected happened. One of her golden shoes slipped off her foot and got stuck on the step. With no time to retrieve it, Cinderella vanished into the night, returning to her mother's grave and leaving the dress and the other golden shoe at the foot of the enchanted hazel tree. When she returned home, she dressed again in her servant rags as if nothing had happened. At the castle, the prince was in despair. He declared that he would find the mysterious young woman at any cost. He took the golden shoe and ordered that it be brought to every maiden in the kingdom. "The one who fits the shoe will be my wife," he decreed. When news of the prince and the golden shoe reached Cinderella's house, the stepmother immediately saw an opportunity. Determined to ensure that one of her daughters became the princess, she began devising a cruel and cunning plan. When the prince arrived with his servants at the house, he presented the golden shoe to the sisters. The first, blinded by ambition and the thought of wealth, tried to put it on. However, her foot was far too large. The shoe didn't even slide past her toes. The stepmother, with a cold smile, took her daughter aside and whispered, "Take this knife and cut off your toes. When you're queen, you won't need to walk much." The young woman hesitated, but consumed by greed, did as her mother instructed. She cut off her toes, suppressing her scream of pain, and slipped the shoe on, which now seemed to fit perfectly. She limped over to the prince, who, satisfied, began to take her back to the castle. But as the carriage passed through the forest, the white birds who had been watching everything began to sing. "Look at the blood, there's no room in the shoe. The bride is false, she's a farce through and through." Confused, the prince looked at the young woman's feet and saw that the shoe was stained with blood and her toes grotesquely mutilated. Furious, he brought her back and ordered the other sister to try. The second sister, more cunning, saw what had happened but was undeterred. When she realized that the shoe was too tight, the stepmother once again offered a horrific solution. "Cut your heel. When you're queen, you'll have servants to carry you." Without a second thought, the second sister took the knife and cut her heel, placing the bloodied shoe on her foot. Despite the excruciating pain, she walked over to the prince and got into the carriage. But the white birds, ever vigilant, didn't let the deceit pass. Look at the blood, there's no room in the shoe. The bride is false, she's a farce through and through." Once again, the prince saw the blood and uncovered the deception. Returning to the house a third time, he insisted that all the young women present try the shoe, including Cinderella. The stepmother tried to stop him, claiming that the young girl was nothing but a dirty, insignificant servant. But the prince was adamant. As Cinderella approached, the birds sang joyfully, as if announcing that something extraordinary was about to happen. Cinderella, hesitant and shy, approached the prince. Dressed in her rags, with her face smudged with ashes, she seemed anything but a contender for royalty. But the white birds, watching from the highest branch of the hazel tree, began singing a melody that echoed like a prophecy. "Here is the true bride, pure and loyal, sweet and captive." Intrigued, the prince ordered her to try on the golden shoe. The stepmother and sisters burst into laughter, mocking the idea that someone like Cinderella could own something so grand. But to everyone's surprise, the shoe slid onto her foot perfectly. Before anyone could say a word, the birds descended in a flurry, landing on Cinderella's shoulders. Their wings glistened like snow in the sun, and with each chirp, they revealed the truth to the prince. She is the true bride, pure and sincere as her mother foretold. Upon hearing this, the stepmother tried to intervene, claiming that it was all a trick. But the prince paid her no heed. He took Cinderella's hand and declared that she would be his bride. The birds, in an almost supernatural gesture, made petals rain down on the young woman, who was now once again dressed in the dazzling golden gown and radiant shoes, as if the enchantment had returned. As the prince prepared to take Cinderella to the castle, the stepmother and sisters fell to their knees, begging for forgiveness. They claimed that their actions had been driven by desperation, but their faces betrayed envy and hatred. The birds, who had been silent allies until now, took on a vengeful role. They attacked the sisters, pecking their eyes with precise cruelty until they were blinded. Amid their screams of pain, a sense of divine justice filled the air. The birds chirped as if to announce the final verdict. Those who are cruel and blind of heart shall live in darkness for eternity. Cinderella, though she had suffered greatly at their hands, said nothing. She merely looked at the three women, now reduced to pitiful figures, and left with the prince to begin a new life. Over the years, the sisters, who had lost everything, became known as blind beggars, wandering the village in search of alms, forever haunted by the memory of their actions. When Cinderella arrived at the castle with the prince, she was greeted with celebrations and acclaim. The people were enchanted by the simplicity and kindness of the young woman, who now shone as a true queen. The wedding ceremony was marked by unparalleled luxury, but there was also an air of mystery hanging over the event. The white birds, who had always been Cinderella's allies, were present, perched on the windows and towers of the castle. Yet instead of singing joyfully, they remained silent, as if guarding a dark secret. At the altar, the prince took Cinderella's hands and declared his eternal love. As the ceremony progressed, the young woman couldn't help but display a faint glimmer of sadness in her eyes. Despite her new status and the prince's love, the suffering she had endured over the years seemed to haunt her still. However, the most unsettling moment occurred during the wedding banquet. Cinderella's blind sisters, guided by servants, were brought into the hall at the prince's request. They came dressed in simple clothes, with expressions of supplication, bearing the weight of their humiliation. On their knees, they begged Cinderella for forgiveness, shedding tears that mingled with the dried blood on their faces. Cinderella, now a queen, rose in silence. Her posture was graceful, but her expression remained indecipherable. She approached her sisters and, to everyone's astonishment, offered them food and water, but that was all. There were no words of comfort nor gestures of affection. Her gaze seemed more distant than ever, as if the kindness her mother had instilled in her had been corrupted by her suffering. The sisters were escorted out of the castle, destined to wander in darkness forever, while the birds chirped in unison as if approving the outcome. As for Cinderella, she lived as a queen alongside the prince. But the story does not tell us if she lived happily ever after. Some say that, on stormy nights, she could be seen alone in the castle gardens, at the foot of a hazel tree planted there in memory of her mother. The white birds, now rarer, continued to visit her, but their songs seemed mournful than before. And so ends the grim true story of Cinderella. A tale that reminds us that, behind happy endings, there are often tears, blood, and buried secrets. But don't fear. On the final screen, you'll find a story that will stir your mind. Until then, if you